Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and today on this gray, rainy spring morning, what better thing is there to do than to sit around and think about what books you'd like to read next? Which is my way of saying I bought more books. Now let me preface this with 3 of these are Christmas presents, which were exchanged very belatedly. If you watched my vlog, you will know that Jonathan came by and dropped off my Christmas presents, and I was able to give him his birthday presents, which also meant that since the last of my Christmas presents came in, I finally felt safe to spend gift cards that I had been given for my birthday. Having a birthday the month before Christmas always makes spending gift cards a bit difficult. I did end up paying for a few of these myself, but by and large it is a gift haul, and I'm very grateful to everyone who enabled my book buying habit. First, from Jonathan, he very kindly got me 2 Pan Macmillan collector's editions of classics that he knows that I love. The first is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I have to say I wouldn't have picked to have a Pan Macmillan collector's edition of this, but I love it now that I have it. I love the novel anyway, and I do own a Penguin Black Classic version of it, but gave it to me and I thought, oh my gosh, it's so pretty anyway. But on the back, they chose the quote, "You look as if you thought it tainted you to be loved by me." And for any of you who know the novel, that is just heartbreaking to me in the best possible way. If you're not familiar, North and South is a novel about Margaret Hale, whose family is, through various circumstances, forced to leave their home in the rural south of England to travel to a town in the industrial north of England in the Victorian era, and her relationship with both the mill owner, one of the mill owners, Mr. Thornton, and with some of the mill workers. I always think of it as Jane Austen meets Charles Dickens. You have Dickens' realism and grittiness, but you also have a romance that is very similar to Pride and Prejudice. So if you haven't read it and that calls to you, I would highly recommend it. The other Pan Macmillan collector's edition he bought for me was Much Ado About Nothing, which is my favorite Shakespeare play of all time. And having it in this handy little edition that supposedly I could carry with me everywhere, but I would honestly be afraid to. And did I mention, it's also illustrated. So these deserve someplace very special to go on display, though I haven't quite figured out where that's going to be. The last book he bought me was Juana la Primera, or Juana the First, by Ana Arsumanian, I think, which is an extremely interesting book. I'm not even sure what kind of a book to call it, because it is essentially a very long poem that takes up the length of a novella. So I don't know, does that count as an epic poem? Is it a novella? Is it just a poem? I don't know what to call it. But it is also a bilingual edition. So the English version is in the front, and then the Spanish version is at the back. This is a poem that quite simply gives voice to Juana the First, also known as Juana la Loca or Juana the Mad, who was actually the older sister of Catherine of Aragon. And she went through a terrible time as she married Felipe the Handsome, or Philip of Burgundy. And he was very handsome and she was desperately in love with him. But he also cheated on her repeatedly and was very emotionally manipulative, thus causing her to lose all sense of control. I loved learning about her when I lived in Spain, so I am really intrigued to see what this poem has in store and what light it sheds on Juana's emotional and mental state. Then we come to the books that I ordered for myself, and the first is The Dig by John Preston. Some of you may have seen that the film The Dig was released on Netflix back in January, and it's one that I really want to see, as it stars Carey Mulligan and Ralph Fiennes, who can do no wrong in my books. But I then discovered that it was a novel, so I had to get my hands on it so I could read it before I watched it. And this is the story of the Sutton Hoo Dig, so it is based on a true story of a widow who has all of these mounds out back of her estate, and she calls in a well-known archaeologist because she thinks there's something special about these mounds, and she wants him to take a look at it. So they are trying to uncover what is in these mounds and what light it can shed on history, while fighting all sorts of bureaucratic red tape that is being thrown in their way, as well as the fact that it's 1939 and World War II is threatening all of their work. It sounds wonderful, it looks fabulous, and I cannot wait to read this. Next, I ordered Perfume by Patrick Suskind, and this was translated from the German by John Woods. And this again I heard about because of the film, which stars, I believe, Ben Whishaw and Alan Rickman. Again, neither of them can do any wrong in my book, so I am desperate to watch it, but I want to read it first. I also want to read it because I'm a major scaredy cat, so at least then if I watch the film afterwards, I will know what's coming and when to look away. This is the story of a young French man in 18th century Paris who is born with no scent of his own, but an amazing sense of smell. So he becomes an apprentice to a perfumer, and he develops this desire to create the ultimate perfume, the best perfume that there has ever been, which leads him to become a murderer. That sounds fascinating. I'm really intrigued to see what this book is like. Next, I ordered 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes because I am more of a Greek myth retelling addict than I thought. This tells the story of the Trojan War through the perspective of all of the women involved. So it has been compared to The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker, and it has also won many prizes, as The Silence of the Girls did. And I loved The Silence of the Girls, which I read towards the end of 2019. So I am very excited to see how this retelling measures up. Next, I ordered Clanlands by Sam Heughan and Graham McTavish, with a foreword by Diana Gabaldon. This is the companion book to the television series Men in Kilts, which is out now on Starz, and I have been loving watching it. It is basically a buddy road trip through Scotland with the stars of Outlander, Sam Heughan and Graham McTavish, who are Scottish themselves, and they explore all different aspects of Scotland, from its native languages to the food, the sport, the music, everything you can possibly imagine, and a lot of its history. I love Scotland and everything it has to offer. I have some Scottish ancestry myself, and I love the Outlander books. I have resisted watching the Outlander series for a long time, mainly because they waited too long to cast Ewan McGregor as Jamie, who I wanted when I was 17. But nonetheless, watching this series has made me think more kindly of Sam Heughan, and I may go back and watch it later. But the book looks wonderful as it keeps flipping perspective from Sam's perspective to Graham, and back and forth and back and forth. So you get to see both of their perspectives on the same events, which becomes very amusing as they both love competing with and tormenting each other as they go. It also sounds very similar to Long Way Round by Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman, which I read in high school and which is also the companion novel to a television series in which Ewan and Charlie ride motorcycles all the way around the world. They start in London, I believe, and they end in New York, taking ferries when they have to, but beyond that, motorcycles all the way. And it was to raise money for UNICEF. But here again, you got to see their perspectives on the same situations, which were often very different from each other and had very comical outcomes. So if you like the sound of either of these books, please do check them out. Next, because it was on sale and I couldn't resist, I got Dear Mrs Byrd by A.J. Pierce, which I have heard wonderful things about. It's the story of a young woman who is desperate for advancement in her career as a journalist during World War II, and she gets promoted to what sounds like a wartime correspondent, and she is thrilled until she discovers that it is in fact as a helper to Mrs. Byrd, who writes the self-help column, rather like Dear Abby or other agony aunts. And Mrs. Byrd has a strict system for determining whose letters she will answer in the newspaper and whose she will not. Any hint of anything that society would consider inappropriate, such as girls who've gone too far, or women who would like a divorce, she refuses to answer, and they go into a separate box. But after a while, our main character decides to sneak those letters home and to write answers to those women herself. It sounds really cozy and really sweet and wonderful, and how could I resist? And finally, I picked up The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healey, which is the story of a young woman who is sent to accompany a lot of the stuffed animals from the British Museum, or the Museum of Natural History, a natural history museum. And she is tasked with accompanying their collection to Lockwood Manor, which is a manor house out in the countryside, and they're evacuating because of World War II. However, when she reaches this manor, very dark and strange things start to unfold, and it gets very gothic. So I love all of those things, so I can't wait to see what this turns out to be. So there you have it. Those are books that I recently acquired. I did order a few more which have not yet arrived, so I will be sharing those with you along with some pre-orders in April. Are there any books that you are really looking forward to reading this month? Have you read any of these books and would you recommend them? Or are you equally excited to read some of them now that I've described them to you? Please chat to me in the comments down below, except if you didn't like any of these books. Please don't tell me that. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.